They kicked her basket, and her herbs scattered across the mud. She could not see where they fell. She could not see anything at all. But as she knelt in the dirt, reaching out with trembling hands, one of the traders noticed something on her wrist. A golden bangle. Ancient. Carved with a royal seal that no ordinary hand should ever touch. Who was this blind girl, kneeling in the dust of Oba Market? And why did she wear the mark of a king? The morning Ada arrived at Oba Market was like every other morning she had ever known. The air was thick with the smell of pepper and palm oil, the sound of vendors calling out prices, the warmth of the sun spreading slowly across the red earth. She walked the same path she had walked 1,000 times before, 12 steps from the old mango tree, then left, then 4 more steps to the flat stone she used as her marker. She sat down, arranged her herbs by feel alone, and opened for business. She could not see the market around her. She had never been able to see it. But Ada knew this place the way a bird knows its own tree, by sound, by smell, by the memory in the soles of her feet. She was 17 years old. She lived alone in a small rented room at the edge of the village. She sold dried herbs, yuda, uzisa, ehuru, bitter leaf wrapped carefully in small packets that she tied herself before dawn each morning. She earned just enough to buy food, just enough to keep the door closed against the cold. It was a small life, but it was hers. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss a story, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Now, you must understand the woman who ruled Oba Market. Her name was Madame Constance. She was not a cruel woman in the way that lightning is cruel, random and without thought. No, Madame Constance was cruel, the way a slow poison is cruel, deliberate, patient, and fully aware of what it was doing. She had run the largest stall at Oba Market for 22 years. She sold the finest fabrics in the region, imported from traders who came by road and by boat, and she wore those fabrics on her body like armor, gold rings on 4 fingers, a deep green brocade wrapper every market day, immaculate regardless of the weather. She was wealthy. She knew it, and she made sure everyone else knew it too. She had 3 women who worked beside her, Ngozi, Bisi, and a younger woman everyone called Comfort. These 3 followed Madame Constance the way shadows follow a tall tree, doing whatever she asked without question, laughing at whatever she mocked, and joining in whatever cruelty she invented for the day. Madame Constance had decided long ago that Ada was a problem. Not because Ada had done anything to her, not because their stalls competed. A girl selling herbs could never threaten a fabric queen. But something about Ada had always bothered Madame Constance in a way she could never quite name. Perhaps it was the way Ada sat so still while the market moved around her like a river around a stone. Perhaps it was the way customers occasionally stopped at Ada's small cloth and spoke to her with gentleness, the way people speak to someone they feel sorry for but also, somehow, respect. Perhaps it was simply that Ada existed in her market without permission and without apology. And so, Madame Constance had made Ada's life small and painful in 100 small ways. She told customers not to buy from a blind girl who knew what had been mixed into those herbs. She arranged for her own stall to expand, gradually, week by week, until Ida's space was squeezed to almost nothing. When rain came and the mud spread, it was always Ada's side that flooded first. When children ran through the market playing, Madame Constance never stopped them from scattering Ada's carefully arranged packets. She would watch, she would laugh a little, and she would say nothing. But Ada never fought back. She never raised her voice. She never cursed. She never went to the market elder, old Baba Cola, who sat under the awning near the entrance and was supposed to settle disputes. She simply arranged her herbs again, reset her cloth, and continued. This stillness, more than anything else, infuriated Madame Constance. You cannot win a war against someone who refuses to go to battle. Ada had no family that anyone knew of. She had come to the village 8 years earlier, as a child of 9, brought by an elderly woman named Mama Chisim, who had since passed. Mama Chisim had never explained where Ida came from. Sioni sighed whenever anyone asked, that the child was hers, and that was enough. When Mama Chisim died, she left Ada the small rented room, the herb-selling trade, and one single instruction: Never remove the bangle from your wrist. The bangle, Ada wore it always, on her left wrist, just above the pulse point, as though it had grown there. It was old gold, the kind that has been worn long enough to become part of a person. Carved into its surface was a pattern none of the village craftsmen recognized. 2 serpents facing each other, a small sun held between their open mouths. Intricate, beautiful, strange, and utterly unlike anything that belonged on the wrist of a girl who sold herbs in the dust of an ordinary market. No one had ever truly asked about it. Not seriously. Not until the morning that everything changed. The trouble began, as so much trouble does, with a small injustice that someone decided not to stop themselves from committing. Madame Constance arrived at the market that morning in an especially dark mood. One of her fabric suppliers had failed to deliver a promised shipment. She had already promised that fabric to 3 customers, who would now be disappointed, and their disappointment would become her problem, her delay, her lost income. Madame Constance, who did not handle inconvenience gracefully, had decided before she even reached her stall that this was going to be a bad day for everyone around her, not just for herself. She saw Ada's small cloth spread near the path. She walked toward it without slowing her stride. Her foot caught the edge of the basket. Whether it was deliberate or careless, only Madame Constance knew, and she was not a woman who distinguished much between the two when her mood was dark. The basket tipped. Ada's carefully wrapped herb packets scattered across the wet morning earth. The night's rain had left the ground soft, and red mud soaked into the cloth packets instantly, the smell of wet yucca and bitter leaf rising sharp and green into the warm air. Ada reached out immediately, instinctively, hands moving fast across the ground, to gather what she could before more was ruined. Ngozi laughed first, then Bisi, then Comfort, though Comfort laughed more quietly and kept her eyes low. Madame Constance stood over Ada and looked down at her. "This is not your section," she said, her voice flat and cold as an iron bar left in the shade. "You are blocking the path. Pack your rubbish and move." Ada said nothing. She kept gathering her herbs, her fingers reading the ground the way they always did. Careful, precise, unhurried. "Did you hear me?" Madame Constance's voice climbed. "I said move." "I hear you, madam," Ada said quietly. Her voice was even still, like water that has no wind to disturb it. "I will move as soon as I have collected my things." This calmness was the wrong answer. It always was. It was the answer that made Madame Constance feel as though she were the one being dismissed rather than the other way around. She bent down and shoved the basket with her open hand. Not the accidental nudge of a careless foot this time. Firm push that sent the basket sideways and scattered the last of Ida's herbs into the mud. "There," she said. "Now there is nothing left to collect." "Move." Ada knelt in the red mud, her hands pressed flat against the earth. The smell of the wet clay was everywhere, thick and old, the smell of the ground that holds everything and judges nothing, and Ada said nothing. Not because she had no words. She had words. She had always had words. But she had learned, a long time ago, that some battles are not fought with the voice. She began to rise, and that was when the sound of hooves entered the market from the eastern road. 4 horses, heavy and proud, red and gold cloth, the colors of the royal household draped across their backs and fluttering in the morning air. Riding at the front was a man in formal palace attire, a long cream robe with gold threading at the collar and cuffs. He was young, perhaps 30, with a face that carried authority the way a river carries water. Naturally, without effort, his name was Emeka. He was the royal messenger of the great Obi, the king whose palace sat on the hill beyond the forest, 3 hours' ride from Oba village. He was passing through on official business, bound for the district commissioner's compound. He had not planned to stop at the market. But he stopped. He stopped because something caught his eye, a glint of gold down near the earth, where a girl was kneeling in the mud. Emeka dismounted before his escort could react. He walked forward through the parting crowd, the market pulling back on both sides, the way a river pulls back from the prow of a boat. He crouched in front of Ada. His eyes were fixed on her left wrist. The bangle. Time stopped. The world stopped. Everything stopped. The color drained from Emeka's face, all of it, instantly, as though something had reached inside him and removed it. His hand lifted slowly, hovering above the bangle without touching it, the way you hold your hand above a fire to measure its heat before you commit. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. Ada turned her face toward his voice, that precise, practiced turn of a person who navigates the world through sound. "It is mine," she said. "It has always been mine." Emeka stood slowly. He turned to his escort. His voice was barely above a breath, but in the silence that had fallen over the market, every person in that place heard it as clearly as a bell. "Send word to the palace immediately. Tell the Obi I have found her." Found who? Who had this royal messenger been searching for? And why did a man of the palace look at a blind girl kneeling in market mud with an expression that could only be called grief? The market did not recover its voice for a long time after Emeka spoke those words. Madame Constance stood exactly where she was, green brocade wrapper immaculate, gold rings catching the sun, and watched as the royal messenger called for water and a clean cloth to wash Ada's hands and knees. She watched him speak to Ada in a low, careful voice, explaining that he needed to ask her questions, important questions, and that she should not be afraid. She watched Ada listen with that maddening stillness of hers, nodding slowly, showing neither panic nor excitement, just that same unreadable calm she always wore. Something cold and unpleasant moved through the space behind Madame Constance's ribs. She went back to her stall and told herself it was nothing. A coincidence, a confused messenger, or the girl had stolen the bangle from someone. These things happened. She laid out her fabrics. Her hands were not quite steady. Emeka took Ada to the guest house at the compound of the village elder Babakola. He sent his fastest rider ahead to the palace with the message. Then he sat across a low wooden table from Ada, in a room that smelled of old timber and cooling palm wine, and he asked her to tell him everything she knew about herself. Ada told him. Mama Chisholm, the village of Oba, the herbs, the bangle she had been told never to remove, the instruction that had come with no explanation and had always felt, to Ada, like a door she was not yet meant to open. "Did Mama Chisholm ever tell you where you came from before she found you?" Emeka asked. "She said, 'I was found,'" Ada said, "on the road between the two rivers, the old road that no one uses now. She said, 'I was alone.' She said I was too young to have been there by myself, and that whoever left me had done so in the night. She never said more than that. I asked her many times. She would only say, 'You are mine,' and that is enough." Emeka was quiet for a long moment. Through the wooden walls, the sounds of the market drifted in voices haggling, a child calling out, the distant rhythm of someone's song carried on the warm air. "The bangle you wear," Emeka said at last, "is the seal of Obideo. It is given at birth to the children of the royal house, a symbol older than anyone alive. Only one was ever made small enough to fit a newborn's wrist." He paused. That smaller bangle was placed on the wrist of the Obi's daughter the day she was born, 17 years ago. Ada said nothing. "The princess disappeared 8 nights after her birth," Emeka continued. "She was taken from the palace under the cover of darkness. The healer who attended her birth was found dead 3 days later, on the road beyond the northern gate. No one was ever charged with either crime. The Obi has never stopped searching, not for 1 year of those 17. The room was very still. Outside, a bird called once, and went quiet. "I am not a princess," Ada said. Her voice was soft, but certain, the voice of a person who has built a life with her own hands and knows its weight. "I am a girl who sells herbs in the market." "You are both," Emeka said gently, "until we know which one is the whole truth." Ada was brought to the palace the following morning, riding behind Emeka on the second horse, her hand holding the saddle, her face turned slightly upward, the lifelong habit of a person who navigates by sound and air rather than by sight. The forest road smelled of damp leaves and morning mist. Birds called from the high canopy. Ada listened to all of it with the concentrated attention of someone who has spent 17 years learning to see with her ears. The palace was warm, stone, and high ceilings, An incense, a deep, resinous smell that Ada had never encountered before. A smell that seemed to pull at something old and unnamed in her memory, like hearing a melody you recognize but cannot place. Obideo met them in the great hall. He was a tall man, not young. His hair was white at the temples, and his face carried the particular heaviness of a man who has grieved for a long time without resolution. He stood very still as Emeka guided Ada forward. His gaze moved directly to the bangle. His jaw tightened, only once, and then was controlled. "Come closer," he said. His voice was deep, carefully measured. Ada stepped forward. The incense thickened around her. Then yet she could detect something else, something that pulled at her the way a half-remembered dream pulls at you in the first minutes of waking. Something warm, something that felt, strangely, like arriving somewhere you did not know you had been before. Obideo lifted her wrist and examined the bangle for a long, silent moment. Then he looked at her face, really looked the way a person looks at something they have imagined for so many years that they are not sure the real thing will match. "You cannot see," he said. Not a question, a careful, pained observation. "No," Ada said. "I have never been able to." The Obi closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet at the edges. "My daughter," he said quietly, "was born with perfect sight. The healer who took her, we have always believed he did something to her before he disappeared. We never knew what." That was the first edge of the truth. Ada felt it arrive the way you feel the opening of a story before you understand what kind of story it is going to become. The royal records keeper, an elderly woman named Madame Abina, brought documents from the palace vault that had been locked away for 17 years. She laid them carefully on the great table. Obideo, Emeka, and 2 senior advisors leaned over them. Ada sat to one side, her hands folded in her lap, listening. The documents contained the healer's own handwriting, a confession written on the night the man understood he was going to be caught and chose, perhaps, to leave the truth behind him as a kind of payment for what he had done. He had not acted alone. He had been paid. Paid well. Paid by someone inside the palace. Who? Emeka's voice was tight and careful. Madame Avina pointed to a name written at the bottom of the second page, a name Ada did not recognize. But Obideo recognized it. His entire body stilled, the way a tree stills before a great wind. "My brother," he said. The 2 words fell into the room like stones dropped into still water. They sank, and the silence closed over them, and the silence was worse than any sound. Obideo had a younger brother. His name was Reginald Ez, and he had been passed over for the kingship 17 years ago when their father made his final decision. Reginald had accepted this quietly, or so everyone believed. He had left the palace, built a life in the city, become a prosperous businessman. He attended royal festivals. He sent gifts at every celebration. He smiled the easy smile of a man who had made peace with the hand he had been dealt. No one had ever looked at that smile too carefully. Baba Adessa, the elder palace healer, a man of 75 who had served 3 obis across his long life, was summoned. He examined Ada with quiet. He examined the bangle. He asked her a series of soft questions about headaches, about light sensitivity, about whether she ever dreamed in color. Then he sat back, folded his hands, and spoke in the unhurried voice of a man who has long since stopped wasting words. "The blindness is not natural. It was induced. There is an ancient compound prohibited by the Healer's Council 3 generations ago, and rightly so, that, if administered to a newborn, causes the light-receiving part of the eye to sleep rather than to die." He let that word settle. Sleep, not die. The child would grow in complete darkness, but the sight would remain there waiting, preserved, like a fire banked beneath ash. The room had gone absolutely still. "Are you telling me," Obideo sighed, measuring each word, "that her sight can be restored?" Baba Adisa looked at Ada for a long, quiet moment. "I am saying there is a ritual. It has not been performed in living memory. I know the method, because my teacher wrote it down, and because I have always believed in the long, private hope that old healers carry, that it might one day be needed." He paused. "I am saying she may be able to see." I am saying it is worth the attempt." And then the floor gave way. An advisor named Harrison Young, efficient, always clipped in his speech, stood and cleared his throat. Before any ritual could be performed, he said, they must verify the girl's identity through the official royal protocol. This was not his preference, he assured the room. This was the law. Identity verification for royal claimants required a formal tribunal of 3 senior chiefs from neighboring kingdoms. The process required documentation, preparation, and travel. It would take no fewer than 4 weeks. 4 weeks, the room exhaled, not with relief, but with the particular resignation of people who understand that justice, even when it is right in front of you, must still pass through its proper channels. Ada sat in the corner of the great hall and folded her hands in her lap. She had waited 17 years. 4 weeks was nothing. She could wait. But that evening, as Emeka walked her to the guest quarters the palace had prepared for her, he happened to look across the courtyard. He saw Harrison leaving through the east gate on horseback, riding with the urgency of a man carrying a message that could not wait until morning. Riding toward the city where Reginald Ez lived, Emeka stood and watched the dust settle behind the departing horse. Something cold moved slowly down the length of his spine. By the next morning, it was confirmed. Harrison was Reginald's man. He had been placed inside the palace 3 years earlier. A gift, Reginald had said at the time, a capable young administrator to ease the burden on the Obi's staff. The Obi had accepted without suspicion. Why would he? Brothers offer gifts. It is the nature of family. The message Harrison had carried to Reginald was simple. She has been found. She is at the palace. The ritual has been proposed. Reginald's reply was intercepted by Emeka's own man the following morning, before it reached Harrison. Stop the ritual. Whatever the cost. Stop it! Emeka read the message twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his coat. The worst truth was still to come. Emeka obtained Reginald's financial records through a contact at the City Trade Commission, a woman who owed the palace a debt of honor and who delivered the files without asking what they were for. Emeka spread them on the table in his chamber and went through them line by line through the night. Buried in the records, dated 16 years ago, was a payment to a specialist healer in the Eastern District. The record listed the purpose only as consultation child, ongoing 16 years ago, 1 year after the princess was taken. Unbesidet, 2 more entries, 8 years apart, each one a payment to a different intermediary in a different town, each one traceable, through careful work, back to the same source, back to Reginald. Reginald had known where Ada was. For 16 years, he had known exactly where she was. He had never sent anyone to harm her. He was too careful for that, too patient. But twice, through channels that could not easily be traced back to him, he had made quiet arrangements to ensure she remained exactly where she was. Invisible, unremarkable, poor, blind. In a market, selling herbs, a 12-step walk from a mango tree. He had stolen her past. He had stolen her sight. He had stolen 17 years of her life. And he had maintained that theft with the patient, meticulous care of a man who intended to keep what he had taken forever, if he could manage it. Emeka set down the final page. The candle on his table had burned low, and the smell of warm wax filled the room. He sat in the near-dark for a long moment, looking at nothing. Then he rose and went to wake the Obi. Reginald Ez received them in his city house, a fine, airy building with high windows and furniture, chosen by someone who understood the language of expensive taste. He was a composed man, slender and 60, with his brother's white at the temples, but a face that had been arranged, across many careful years, into an expression of permanent mild pleasantness, the pleasantness of a man who has never needed to be anything else. He smiled when Obidio walked through his door. "Brother," he said warmly, rising from his chair, "this is a surprise. You should have sent word. I would have prepared something." "I am sending it now," the Obi said. They sat in the parlor. The room smelled of cedar wood and the faint sweetness of tobacco. Emeka stood near the door, his face still. Ada sat beside the Obi, her hands folded in her lap, her face angled slightly upward. A palace guard stood at each exit. Reginald looked around at all of this once. Briefly, and then brought his gaze back to his brother's face and kept it there, the practiced calm of a man who has decided not to be the first one to blink. "I want to speak about the night of the 23rd day, Obi-Dai-Yosai. 17 years ago, the night my daughter was taken from this family." Reginald's pleasant expression remained entirely unchanged. "A terrible thing," he said, with the practiced sorrow of a man who has said these words many times before. "A crime that was never solved. I have prayed for resolution every year." "You know that the crime is solved," the Obi said. Just a pause, a breath, a flicker. But Reginald's pleasantness shifted beneath it, like a riverbank shifting beneath moving water. "Only slightly. Only for a moment." "I don't know what you mean," he said. Emeka set the documents on the low table between them. The healer's confession, the financial records, the intercepted message in Reginald's own handwriting. Reginald looked at them without touching them, the way a man looks at a weapon pointed at him, calculating distance. "These documents," he began, "are the healer's own handwriting?" Obi-Dai-Yosai sighed. "Verified by 3 independent scholars, before we came to you this morning. Your name, the payment amount, the arrangement, all of it in the hand of a dead man who made sure, before he died, that someone would one day be able to read it." "A forgery," Reginald said smoothly, pivoting without hesitation. "Someone is trying to create trouble between us, brother. You know what I am. You know I would never." "Harrison wrote to you the night we brought her to the palace," Emeka said from the door. His voice was quiet, precise. "3 witnesses saw him leave through the east gate. Your reply was intercepted before dawn." Reginald's eyes moved to the intercepted note on the table. He looked at it for a long moment. Something moved behind his face, a recalculation swift and practiced, the movement of a man who has spent his whole life finding the best position available to him. "Even if," he began, adjusting his tone to something almost reasonable, almost philosophical, "even if some portion of what you are presenting has elements that require explanation, you must understand the position I was in. I was older. I was prepared my entire life for leadership. Our father chose without giving a reason, without discussion, without regard for what had been built into me. Expected of me, promised. You took a baby." Ada's voice. It was quiet, barely above a conversation, but it stopped every sound in the room as completely as if she had shouted. She was looking in Reginald's direction, truly looking, with the new sight that Baba Adisa had not yet restored, but that seemed already, in this room, to see more clearly than anyone else present. "You took a baby from her father," Ada said, "and you had someone put out her eyes, and then you put her on a road in the dark and left her there." She paused, letting those words sit exactly where she had placed them. "You did not do it in anger. You planned it. You paid for it. And then, for 16 years, you followed it. Made sure it held, made sure the distance never closed, made sure the girl stayed invisible and the blindness stayed in place." She unfolded her hands and laid them quietly on her knees. "And in all that time, you came to festivals. You sent gifts. You called him brother. You sat at his table and ate his food and used his name, all while knowing what you had done to the child who should have been sitting at that table with him." Reginald opened his mouth. "Do not explain yourself to me," Ada said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I am not asking you to explain. I am not here for your reasoning or your grievance or the story you have told yourself about why you were justified. I am here to say what you did out loud, in your own house, in front of witnesses, so that it exists in the air as a spoken thing, and not only as a document. I want you to hear it said by the person you did it to." She looked at him steadily, that same still look she had always had, the look that had infuriated Madame Constance in the market, the look of a person who has never needed anyone else's permission to exist. "I survived it. I am here. I know your name, and a girl who could not see has seen you more clearly than anyone in this room ever did." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has texture and weight. The cedar-scented room, the afternoon light through the high windows, Reginald sitting very still, the pleasantness finally gone from his face, replaced by something older and more honest. Obideo stood. When I spoke, it was with the voice of a king, not the voice of an angry man, not the voice of a grieving father, though he was both. The voice of a king, unhurried, final, uncontested. The voice of a verdict that the world has already rendered and is only now being announced aloud. "You will stand before the royal tribunal," he said. "You will answer for every decision that is documented in those pages, the wealth you have accumulated, the council seat you have occupied, the name you have borrowed. All of it will be examined in full, before the chiefs and the elders and the community you have lived among as a respected man, and whatever justice the tribunal determines, you will face it without the protection of my mercy. You gave that mercy up 17 years ago. You surrendered it the night you chose, your ambition over a child who had done nothing but be born." Reginald looked at his brother for a long time. Something moved across his face at last. Not remorse. Not yet. Perhaps not ever fully. But the first dimmed, unwilling recognition that the story he had been telling himself for 17 years had finally, with today's light, reached its last page. If this story is moving you, subscribe now. The ending will change how you see everything. The tribunal was held in the palace great hall, open to every chief and elder and village representative who wished to attend. The great hall filled to its walls. Word had traveled, as word of humiliation and dignity always travels faster than any official announcement. 3 senior chiefs from the neighboring kingdoms arrived in their formal robes. The Obi sat to the right of the central table. Madame Abina, the royal records keeper, sat to the left, with every document arranged in precise order before her. Reginald Ez stood in the center of the hall. He had come with a lawyer from the city. A confident man in a pressed suit, who spoke in the practiced manner of someone accustomed to reframing difficult truths into more palatable shapes. But documents do not reframe easily. Handwriting does not negotiate, and intercepted messages, written in your own hand and signed with your own urgency, speak with a directness that no lawyer can comfortably redirect. The tribunal deliberated for 2 hours. Their judgment was this: Reginald Ez was stripped of his seat on the royal council, a seat he had held quietly for 12 years, a seat from which he had monitored, at a comfortable distance, the ongoing silence of the palace's missing princess. He was ordered to pay into the royal treasury a sum equivalent to 17 years of income, earned under the protection of a name he had and he was removed from the royal family register, not as punishment alone, the chief elder explained, but because a man who does what he did has already removed himself. The tribunal was merely recording, in ink, what had already been true, in fact, for 17 years. Harrison was dismissed from palace service and barred from any government position permanently. These were the official consequences. But a man whose prosperity has been built on respectability finds, in the weeks that follow its removal, that respectability is not a possession. It is a loan. And loans, when the terms are broken, are called in all at once. Then Baba Adesa performed the ritual. It required 3 days of careful preparation and 1 full evening in the healer's chamber. Ada lay on a ceremonial mat, the smell of old herbs and warm oil and something ancient in the air around her. A smell she had no name for, a smell that felt like the answer to a question she had not known she was asking. The Obi sat outside the closed door and did not leave for the entire evening. Emeka stood in the courtyard and watched the sky go from orange to dark. The palace was very quiet. On the morning of the 4th day, Ada opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was light. Just light, undivided, enormous, filling everything. She lay completely still and let it pour over and through her. She had known warmth her entire life. The warmth of the sun on her skin, of a fire, of another person's hand. But not this warmth, not the particular warmth of light entering through the eye and traveling all the way down to the center of the chest. It was the warmth of something being returned to its rightful place. Then shapes arrived. Then colors, more of them than she had imagined possible. Layered and shifting, each one slightly different from the one beside it. Then the face of Baba Adisa, crouched beside the mat, watching her with the steady patience of a man who has waited a very long time and is grateful to have lived to see this moment. "Can you see?" he asked softly. Ada raised her hand in front of her face. She looked at her own fingers for a long time, turned her hand over, turned back. She had known the feel of her hands her entire life. She had never seen them. She looked at every line on her palm. She looked at the bangle on her wrist. The two golden serpents, the sun held between their mouths, and for the first time in 17 years of wearing it, she saw the thing that had always told the world who she was, before she ever knew it herself. She began to cry, not the crying of sadness, not the crying of relief, exactly. The crying that comes when something enormous moves through a person, and the body has no other way to release it, the way the sky releases rain, not because it is sad, but because it is full. "I can see," she said. "I can see." Baba Adisa went to the door. He opened it. Obidio stood in the corridor, his hands at his sides, his face holding 17 years of hope and grief in equal measure. He looked at his daughter's open eyes, and when her gaze found his face, and stayed there, truly stayed there. Seeing him, he crossed the room in 3 steps and held her the way. Fathers hold children they have believed for a long time. They had lost forever. The market at Oba village was never quite the same after that day. Word traveled fast, as word about dignity and humiliation always does. Within the week, the story had reached every corner of the district. The blind herb girl who sat 12 steps from the mango tree, the golden bangle on her wrist, the royal messenger who stopped his horse in the mud, the lost princess, the restored sight, the brother who had tried to bury a king's bloodline in dust and obscurity and failed. Madame Constance did not wait to be summoned. She came to the palace gate herself, 3 days after the tribunal, with Ngozi and Bisi and Comfort behind her, and she requested an audience. The guard brought the message to Ada's chambers, a bright, sun-filled room she was still learning to move through with her eyes, her hands still reaching for familiar surfaces, adding the gift of sight to what her fingers had always known. Ada agreed to see them. Madame Constance entered the room and saw the girl she had pushed into the mud standing in the light of a palace window. The straight spine, the still hands, the bangle catching the afternoon sun, and something in Madame Constance that had perhaps always known, on some level it never admitted, finally understood fully what she had done. She went to her knees on the clean marble floor, her green brocade wrapper spread around her. Ngozi followed Bisi. Comfort was already kneeling before the others were fully down. Ada looked at them for a long, quiet moment. She had been looking at so many things these past days. The palace garden, the horses in the courtyard, the forest on the horizon, her own face in a mirror. She had been taking the world in, piece by piece, with the unhurried attention of someone who understands that seeing is a gift and not a right. But this the sight of a woman who had stood over her in the mud, who had pushed her basket aside with a deliberate hand. Now kneeling on marble, this she allowed herself to fully see. "Rise," Ada said. Her voice was the same voice it had always been. Still water unbothered, carrying no triumph in it, only a clear instruction. "Rise, and live differently than you have." That was all, she said. And it was enough. 12 months have passed. When the rains came again to Oba village, the good, heavy rains that turned the earth deep red and brought the smell of new things growing, they found the market changed, and the palace changed, and Ada herself changed, in all the ways that matter, and unchanged in all the ways that matter more. She had learned to see, though any person learns anything worth knowing. Slowly, with patience, with occasional frustration, and with sudden moments of such pure grace that she would stop whatever she was doing and simply stand still, letting the beauty of the visible world settle over her. She learned the color of the forest at dusk, that particular deep green going gold at the edges. She learned the precise shade of her father's formal robes. She learned the way the market looked in the early morning light. Red earth and bright cloth, and the faces of vendors she had known only by their voices for 8 years, now given faces that matched the voices in ways that surprised her, or did not surprise her at all. Obidio never stopped marveling at his daughter. He gave her everything the palace could offer: teachers, advisors, the full education of a royal heir. But the thing about Ada that never changed, the thing that could not be given or taught or arranged by anyone, was her quiet. The stillness she had carried through 17 years of difficulty and smallness and mud. She carried it still. She sat in the great hall of the palace, the same way she had sat in the market. Hands still, attention fully given to whoever was in front of her, no part of her anywhere else. She became known for this. People traveled to the palace not just for official business, but to speak with the princess who listened, who truly listened, in the way that only a person who has spent years knowing that sound carries everything understands how to do. Baba Hadisa was given a place of honor in the palace compound for the remainder of his days. He sat in the courtyard each evening and watched the light change across the hills, and said, on more than one occasion, that he had lived long enough to witness one truly miraculous thing, and that a man could ask for nothing more than that. Emeka, who had stopped at an ordinary market on an ordinary morning because something glinted in the mud, was made head of the royal council's justice arm. He never quite recovered from the feeling of that morning. The feeling of crouching beside a girl in the mud, and understanding, in an instant, that the world was about to change. He said it was the best feeling he had ever known, and he said it was the feeling he was always trying to find again in his work. Madame Constance returned to her stall at Oba Market. She sold her fabric, she kept her green brocade, and her gold rings, but something in her had been permanently rearranged by the sight of a girl she had, treated as dust rising to stand in a palace window with a king's bangle on her wrist. She was quieter now, when vendors around her struggled, when someone's basket tipped in the rain, when a young seller was having a hard morning. Madame Constance sometimes helped, not loudly, not publicly. In small ways, she seemed to hope no one would notice. Whether this was guilt or genuine transformation, only she and God above the market knew for certain. But people noticed, as people always do, and they said quietly among themselves that whatever had happened to Madame Constance had made her, at last, someone they could stand to sit beside. And the spot where Ada used to sit, 12 steps from the mango tree, then left, then 4 steps to the flat stone, remained empty. No vendor claimed it, not because anyone forbade it, but because some places hold the shape of something important. Long after that, something has moved on, and people, without being told, sense it and make space for it. Reginald Eze lived in the city, reduced and quiet, without the shine that had always surrounded him. He was not imprisoned, but he lived in the particular kind of prison that is built not from walls and iron, but from what a man knows about himself in the dark. In the silence, in the space between sleep and waking, when the story he has told himself for 17 years will no longer hold its shape. Some said he had aged 30 years and 2. Some said he had been seen at the palace gate, standing outside for a long time one afternoon without knocking, then going home. No one knew what he had been thinking. No one needed to. The girl who had been stolen from her father's house, sightless and nameless, left on a dark road between 2 rivers, had been returned. Not by force, not by power, by a golden bangle on her wrist, by the memory of an old woman who kept a child's secret for 8 years, and by 17 years of quiet dignity that no market, no mud, no cruelty had managed to erode. The dust they had pushed her into had not buried her. It had simply held her patiently, faithfully, until the right pair of eyes came along to see what was always there. And this, friends, is what the world understood on the morning Ada first opened her eyes. What is taken in darkness cannot stay hidden forever, for the truth is always found, sometimes in the most ordinary place, glinting in the mud at the feet of a girl who was never ordinary at all. Thank you for joining us for this story. Subscribe and click the bell so you never miss a story. Watch our next story right here.